Okay, we're going to look at the budgets between 2020, 2021, 2022, 2023 to 2024 and see how much of the federal government is invested into our state. Okay, so let's start with 2021. Remember earlier 2022, 2021. Earlier I showed you 2019 into 2020. This is the year after. 21.2 billion altogether. 34%, more than 1/3 of our state budget comes from, in 2020 to 2021, comes from federal funds. That is $7.2 billion coming from the federal government. In 2021 to 2022, 34% again from federal funds. That year we had a budget of 25.6. 5.6 times 0.34. That's $8.7 billion coming from the federal government. In 2022 to 2023, it went down from 34 to 29%, but our state budget increased to 26 times 0.29. That one is 7.54 billion coming from federal funds. And this last year, 2023 to 2024, 28%, with a total state budget of 29.4 times by 2.8, $8.23 billion coming from the federal government. Over the 4 years, that's an average of 31% of our state budget is coming from, 1/3 of our state budget over the last 4 years is coming from the federal government. If you feel like that doesn't have any strings tied to that, you'd be mistaken. Just let's take a look at an example right here. Okay, page 68, so I don't forget. This was the U.S. Department of Education, their American Rescue Plan. I do not know if you guys remember that, but that was passed by Congress to help fund schools throughout the country. And on here they have a list. This is to the state of Utah, approved by the State Board of Education. But on here they have their restrictions. Is that the right word? Their ideas of what needs to happen in order to get the money. I can't think of the word right now. But if you look down here on Appendix C, assurances, by signing this document, the SEA, or State Education Association, assures all of the following. Right here. SEA will comply with all ARP Act, American Rescue Plan, and all other ARP ESSA requirements and all requirements of its grant award notification, including but not limited to complying with the maintenance of effort provisions in Section 204, complying with the maintenance of equity, we talked about equity already, provisions in Section 204, and ensuring its local education association, what stands for? Agency, local education agency, comply with the maintenance of equity provision in Section 204 of the ARP Act. So every time you get money from the government, they have stipulations that you need to follow in order to qualify to receive the money. In this case, there's a lot more than just that, but I wanted to point that one out because equity was part of it. coming from the federal government, and the state went right along with it. And Utah went right along with it. Not that they would have had an issue going along with it, because as we've already talked about, Spencer Cox is a fan of DEI. So, but this is just to show you that the federal government has its fingers in deeply, and how they can get their fingers in deeply into the state. Another example that I can think of off the top of my head is during COVID, the craziness of COVID and all of the mandates and requirements that the federal government pushed down from Fauci, and the rules that they set in place, and how Utah just went right along with mask mandates, especially mandating masks for kids in schools, the vaccine requirements, especially with the law where businesses could be fined a substantial amount of money if their employees were not vaccinated, essentially forcing their employees to get vaccines, otherwise they'd get fired. I heard nothing from Utah to stopping that. We talked a little bit about the overreach of government with the ICE regulations for illegal immigrants, the climate issues, our public lands almost exclusively being owned and ran by the federal government. And Cox on his website, by the way, if you go check out their websites, I'll put both of their websites down so you can go get a good idea of them. But if you look at Cox's website, he says the Cox administration is fighting federal overreach. This is how he fights federal overreach. Like he said in that video on climate that I showed you guys, in the climate issue, he writes letters, posts his letters on his website. I don't know what writing a letter is going to do. Writing a letter is not going to change anybody's mind, especially with somebody who is as extreme as the Biden administration is. It's not going to change anybody's minds. Big staunch difference between Phil Lyman and Spencer Cox when it comes to how to deal with the federal overreach. When it comes to the money and being tied to the federal government, I asked him a question at the at Twila Town Hall, so let's take a listen.
You said 30% of our funding in Utah comes from the federal government. What can you do? How long is it going to take to get that to almost, zero, where we don't have to rely on them, or they don't have any sway in how things are run here?
Yeah, so we've gone from 3 years ago, $22 billion budget to we're just on the threshold of $30 billion budget. So we've gone up roughly $8 billion in our budget in 3 years. 29% last year was federal. I think we're on scale to be 26% this year of that's federal. So you say, well, what if we got rid of 26% of the budget? We'd be back about where we were 3 years ago, which was already huge, overgrown government. So I guess what I'm saying is, if Utah were to say, thank you, Forest Service, we're going to take over our forests. You may withhold the funding if you like, but we're going to have healthier forests. We're going to have more water, and we're not going to have that $1.5 billion that comes from the Forest Service for maintaining that. It wouldn't be a bad thing. It wouldn't be
Is that something that you could just say as the governor, or
Yeah.
would we have to go through like legislate?
No, you can say that as governor. Congress has the purse strings. They pass the budgets, but it is the executive branch that works with the federal executive branch on those grants and whether or not we're going to accept them.
So you could hypothetically, day one, you could say, we don't want your help anymore.
You could totally say that.
Okay.
I've wished public money is not the same as private money. You know, $1 billion to you is a lot of money. $1 billion in the public sector, it ends up getting used to expand infrastructure that then becomes a liability. We saw that through COVID, through the some of these massive schools that are being built and things like that with kind of one-time money. It's like, okay, so we got those built, now we've got to maintain them, and it just makes us even more dependent. So it's not giving up $1.5 billion of federal money is not, it doesn't translate quite as some people might think. Oh, that's going to cost a lot of people their jobs. What it's going to do is basically cause the government to trim back a little bit.
Yeah.
In a really helpful way, I think.
Yeah.
Okay, so as you can see, Phil kind of has a different approach when it comes to funding, or rather a different philosophy. He doesn't think that we necessarily need the money, and he's not going to accept federal money if he feels there are any strings attached that might give the federal government more hold or more sway over our state. When it comes to actually standing up to the federal government, he has a strong track record, and I'm going to recommend you guys watch this video. It's 12 minutes long, so I'm not going to play it, but it goes over the story of Phil Lyman and his um, story of standing up to the federal government and being arrested and being pardoned by Donald Trump. And it's a good story. It definitely gives you a different perspective than what our mainstream media tells here in Utah, which maybe I'll do a different video about mainstream media. I'm just going to say anytime you look into any anything sent from mainstream media, I would look deeply into it to see where their sources are coming from. But basically, I'll just give you a rundown real quick of what happened. Um, Phil Lyman, um, before Phil Lyman, in 2007, BLM, the Bureau of Land Management, shut down a county road that went through, um, I think it's Bears Ears National Monument. One of the one of the federal lands areas. There was a county road that went through it. So, um, county road is not the jurisdiction of the federal government. It goes to the jurisdiction of the county. It was closed down for reasons I can't remember the exact reasons, but the BLM said they were only going to close it down for a few weeks, and from 2007 to 2014 they had closed it down the entire time. And 2014, Phil Lyman is the county commissioner, so in San Juan County, um, and he goes to the Bureau of Land Management and says, hey, you guys have had this road closed a lot longer than it should have been and needs to be, and we want to open that back up. That is our road. We need to take care of it. We need to um, do any work that's needed on it. And BLM said, uh, no, that they can't do it yet. So Phil said, well, would it help if we sued you? Would that make it go faster? And BLM said, no, we don't want a lawsuit. And Phil said, okay, well then how about a protest? And they said, well, we don't want to protest either, but that's at least better than a lawsuit. So Phil and a few people from Blanding or around the area in San Juan County set up a protest. They went to the road on ATVs. They drove down the road a certain distance and then drove back, and protest was done. And 5 months later, Phil is served lawsuit papers that he's getting sued by the federal government and charged by the federal government with a misdemeanor conspiracy to trespass for his protest that he did on this road. And he goes to court, and in a nutshell, goes to jail for 10 days, pays a $100,000 fine, and then is pardoned by Trump ultimately. And the reason for me telling you this story is just to show you and tell you that Phil is not scared to stand up to the federal government. He has experience standing up to the federal government, and he does it on his own dime. He didn't have the backing of the state during this, and he didn't have the backing of his county attorney general. He just did it because he believed it's wrong for the federal government to uh, practice more power than what they truly have. So we're going to go next and finish up with a video from Phil right here.
In 1896, Utah became a state. That boundary that defined the state of Utah meant something. It meant that Utah had jurisdiction over the federal land. We talk a lot about transferring public lands to the state. My problem with that is that I've seen the state make some really bad decisions when they have control. And so we have the situation in Utah where 67% of the land is owned by the federal government, and much more of the mineral resources are controlled by the federal government, and they're off limits to us. In Utah, we should never be bowing to the federal government for dismantling our coal-fired power plants, for abandoning our energy sector, for putting carbon credits and carbon mandates on our people, for taking over the water supply of all of these farmers and irrigation companies. We see our forests are being mismanaged, and as a result, the water supply from those forests is diminished. We find that we are more of a vassal state to the federal government instead of standing up and being a true, sovereign, productive, independent state that we should be. We're bending the knee to federal mandates to our own detriment. The roads in Utah, by law, are owned by the counties and by the state. I don't like the way that the state has filed many, many lawsuits on our roads instead of just asserting our ownership and our jurisdiction of the roads themselves. Somebody once asked me, well, how could the state ever manage all of the public lands? They don't have the resources to do that. They couldn't give up the federal money. And I say, well, there's these really nifty little things called counties, and they were designed to do exactly that. Counties are ideally situated, and the county commissioners, the people in those counties, understand the resources that are closest to them better than the federal agencies do. And the counties are equipped, they're designed for that, they've got the mechanisms for handling that. They would not be exploiting, they would not be developing. Even if the land didn't transfer ownership, it's still going to have the jurisdiction of people who actually have the knowledge, the responsibility, and are able to control those factors.
So if you listen to how he talks and the things he says about government, it's very much in line with the political ideology of republicanism, the belief in checks and balances, separation of powers, will of the people, civic participation. And I think that's important to have somebody who believes in the structure that our country was founded on, and to have somebody who will stand up and protect those beliefs against a very strong federal government. And so yeah, those are the 10 issues.